and she's been actively involved in YMA, the Thanksgiving Boutique, and started fighting for racial injustice by leading the prayer walk last summer after the death of George Floyd. And our fourth panelist is Sarah Eiman, who was baptized and confirmed at St. Monica's 9 years ago and has been a parishioner ever since. She has enjoyed volunteering with YMA retreats and Thanksgiving Boutique and currently serves on the Black Lives Matter Committee and Women's Faith Sharing. Sarah is a veterinarian and loves seeing and experiencing the human-animal bond. When she's not working or volunteering, Sarah loves to read, tend to her growing plant garden, and reflect on Jesuit teachings. So I know that you are going to find this a really interesting and informative night, and we turn it over to our panelists.
Thank you all for joining us. We wanted to talk to you today about 6 African-American saints that are up for sainthood. We did want to start with our patroness, Saint Monica of Tagaste in Africa. You know, through her gentleness and her prayers, she was able to convert her pagan husband to Christianity. And I think like most Christian moms, you know, she tried educating her son, Augustine, in the faith, but he chose a different route and actually didn't come back to the faith until he was about 33 years old when he was baptized. And he actually later became co-bishop of Hippo. He led a very holy and simple life, writing over 200 books, letters, and sermons that are still even read today. And in a sign of sort of how whitewashed our history has become, it was actually really hard up until recently to find images of St. Monica and of St. Augustine that showed them with their dark skin. And I think a lot of people don't realize that Christianity didn't originate in Europe. It actually first arrived in Africa in 1st or 2nd century AD and slowly spread west through Alexandria to East Ethiopia. And Black Catholic history specifically began in the Acts of the Apostles, actually chapter 8, verses 26 through 40, with the conversion of the Ethiopian eunuch. And Russ is going to now walk us through some of the highlights of US Black Catholic history.
Thanks, Tola. So yeah, I'm going to attempt to share a fast and furious version of US Black Catholic History 101. It is by no means comprehensive. It'll give you a flavor of some of the big events and accomplishments that took place in our country. So in 1565, Blacks, both slave and free, along with Spanish conquistadors, helped to found the oldest town in the US, St. Augustine of Florida. And over 100 years later, Spain started offering freedom to slaves who converted to Catholicism. In 1781, right here in LA, 11 Catholic families who are a mixture of Africans, Spanish, and indigenous settled on the Porciuncula River, which is modern day LA. And then we get into 2 of the Black Catholics that we'll dive deeper on here in a moment. In 1829, Elizabeth Lange led a handful of women from Baltimore's Haitian refugee colony to educate local children in their homes, and they ended up creating the Oblate Sisters of Providence. In 1842, Henriette DeLille established the Sisters of the Holy Family, and that is in New Orleans, the second religious order for Black women. And that order ministers to poor Blacks, educating and tending to the sick. Shortly thereafter, 1875, James Augustine Healy became the first Black bishop. As far as this century, in 1909, the Knights of Peter Claver were established in Mobile, Alabama, by the Josephites as a parallel to the Knights of Columbus to serve Catholic African Americans. St. Claver was a Jesuit from Spain who dedicated his life to ministering to African slaves in Cartagena. In 1916, the Committee for Advancement of Colored Catholics was formed. This was during World War I, to care for Black Catholic service members who were neglected by the Knights of Columbus and the Black YMCA. After the war, with US bishops silent on behalf of Blacks during the horrific race riots and lynchings of the time, the committee called out the bishops to denounce discrimination. A couple years later, in 1920, the Society of the Divine Word in Greenville, Mississippi, with the blessing of Pope Benedict XV, they opened St. Augustine's, the first seminary for Blacks. some American bishops at that time were still not convinced of the merit of a Black priesthood. And so by 1958, American bishops finally denounced racial prejudice as being immoral for the first time. And in 1965, many Catholic clergy and religious women joined that march in Selma, Alabama. This really marked the Catholic Church's first foray into the civil rights struggle for racial equality. And just to close here, in 1968, we had over 60 Black clergy gathered to discuss the racial crisis. They formed a permanent organization at the first Black Clergy Caucus. And they sent a statement to the bishops strongly criticizing the church, but they were clear in their expression of their devotion, their hope. They listed 9 demands for the church to be faithful to its mission to Blacks and to restore the church within the Black community. And this group is still active today. In 1985, the National Black Catholic Congress was reestablished as a coalition of Black Catholic organizations. And finally this year, Pope Francis appointed the very first African-American cardinal, Wilton Gregory of DC. So again, short history in a short amount of time. I'll hand it off to Tola to chat a little bit about the African-Americans up for sainthood.
Thanks, Russ. There's over 900 Black Catholic saints. Some of the prominent ones that you might know: Saint Monica, Saint Augustine, Josephine Bakhita, Martin de Porres. There's also Simon of Cyrene, was the first African mentioned in the Gospels. He's the one who helped Jesus carry the cross. Also Melchior, he was Black, he was a wise man, and he was there at Jesus's birth. And a fun fact is that there have actually been 3 African popes. I don't know if any of you knew that. And we're excited to introduce these 6 saints up for sainthood. To be eligible for sainthood, though, you have to be either a martyr, live a heroic life of Christian virtues, have a reputation for religious devotion, or sacrifice your life for others. And then you'll become what's called a servant of God. From servant of God, you'll become venerable. From venerable, you become blessed, and eventually you are pronounced a saint. And one of our very first saints we want you to hear about is Venerable Henrietta DeLille.
Great, thank you, Tola. Venerable Henrietta DeLille was an amazing woman, and for a lot of reasons, I think I'm drawn to her. She founded the Sisters of the Holy Family, which cared for the sick and the poor in New Orleans. She also founded the first Black home for the elderly, and she actually cared for people during the yellow fever pandemic. She lived a very virtuous life, and even when she was faced with adversity, as well as living an easier life with luxury, she actually turned it down because of her values. But she truly believed in the sacrament of marriage. I think for many reasons I'm drawn to her, because she says that sin will never fulfill us. She truly believed that she was a servant of God. And for that reason, I think I'm drawn to her in many ways. I feel like we can learn from her and how we can really, when we're faced with racism or adversity, continue to fulfill God's need for helping others.
The Venerable Pierre.
Sorry, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to talk more about Venerable Pierre Toussaint.
The Venerable Pierre Toussaint was born in Haiti, and he began his life as a slave. He was brought to New York, and he became a successful hairdresser for high society women. He was well educated, he learned to read and write, and he was freed from slavery in 1807 when he was 41 years old. And because he was a successful businessman, he was able to purchase his sister's freedom and his wife's freedom. And he also used his own money to help finance Old St. Pat's Cathedral in New York, where he's now buried. And after it was built, he was actually denied entry because of his race. Pierre was a man of faith. He attended daily mass for over 60 years, and he was devoted to the rosary. He was very well known for his love and generosity. Pierre and his wife, they sheltered orphans and refugees in their home. And he's credited by many as being the father of Catholic charities in New York. He was instrumental in raising funds for the first Catholic orphanage. He began New York's first school for Black children, and he also provided funds for the Oblate Sisters of Providence, a religious community of Black nuns founded in Baltimore. We'll hear a little bit more about them later. And Pierre embodied so many principles of Catholic social teaching. In particular, he cared for the poor and vulnerable in New York. He came from slavery and oppression, but he helped restore the lives of others. And he's also a good example of living out the principle of solidarity, the idea that we are our brothers and sisters keepers. And loving our neighbor means working for the common good and working together. I'll pass it over to Russ to talk about another holy man, Augustus Tolton.
Thanks, Sarah. So Augustus Tolton, this guy was a barrier breaker. He was a former slave who was baptized and raised Catholic in Missouri. During the Civil War, his mother embarked on a harrowing 41-mile river crossing escape from her slave owner and did so with her 3 kids, one of whom was 7-year-old Augustus. Later in life, after being rejected by every single American seminary to which he applied, Tolton attended the Pontifical Urban University in Rome, and he was ordained to the priesthood in 1886 at age 31, and in doing so became the first Black priest in the US. Good Father Gus was known for his eloquent sermons and his beautiful singing voice. He did, however, die tragically at the age of 43 after collapsing during a Chicago heat wave. Augustus Tolton really speaks to me. This is a guy who was a pioneer and endured a lot of racism in trying to establish a new parish in Illinois. But he persevered anyways in the name of God and built the most robust early Black Catholic community in the US. It's a very special guy. I will hand this over to Tola.
Thanks, Russ. Sister Theo Bowman was the daughter of a doctor and a teacher. She decided at 8 years old that she wanted to become Catholic. And she decided that she was called to consecrated life when she was a teenager. She decided that. She was renowned for her preaching. She took her messaging nationwide, speaking at over 100 venues a year until her death. Music was especially important to her. And she entered religious life. Entering religious life, I think, is jarring probably for anyone, but especially her. She decided, because the convents were segregated, she decided that she was going to only go to a white convent. She decided that she did not want it to be segregated, that she wanted to try to break down those barriers. And, the congregation was all white. The convent was all white. It was in an all white city, not to mention the cultural and the weather shock, because she was moving to Wisconsin, which has real winters. And she, went through a lot, but she decided that it was necessary and something that she really wanted to do. She always pointed out that the universal church includes people of all races and all cultures. And she challenged bishops to find a way to consult those of other cultures when they were making decisions about the universal church. She started a hymnal she loved singing called Lead Me, Guide Me, the African American Catholic Hymnal. It was the first such work that directly impacted the Black community, with a ton of hymns that could still be sung today and are still sung today by some churches. And she really inspires me because she took a lot of racism, experienced a ton of racism, but she did it with dignity and grace. She always turned the other cheek. She always quoted scripture. She always sang. She always tried to make light of the situation. And because of that, I try to model myself after her. Another wonderful woman of faith is Venerable Julia Greeley.
Venerable Julia Greeley was truly a servant of God. She was born into slavery, and unfortunately, at a young age, her master actually destroyed her right eye with a whip. She was later emancipated in 1865. She helped the poor with the little money she had, and she was known as this woman that would actually go throughout the city of Denver with this red wagon and give food to the poor in the middle of the night so people wouldn't feel ashamed of getting food from someone else. She actually won the award of being the one person of the St. Vincent de Paul Society because she helped so many people in Denver. She would also visit the fire stations in Denver and really help deliver the message of God for the people there. So even in times of difficulty or adversity, she really truly was a servant of God that preached this message of helping poor. Even when she herself didn't come from much money, she helped people with the little that she had.
Mother Mary Lange was born in a Haitian community, and in the early 1800s, she immigrated to Baltimore and discovered that there were very few educational opportunities for Black children in the city. They were denied access to most schools. So, along with several others, Mother Lange started a school in her own home. The school eventually became known as the St. Francis Academy, and it is the oldest operating school for Black Catholic children in the US. And after hearing about and visiting Mother Lange's school, a priest encouraged and helped her form a religious order to educate African American girls. And that's when the Oblate Sisters of Providence were formed. They were the first religious order for African American women in the US, and they're still around today. And for decades, the sisters were the sole providers of Catholic education for Black children in Baltimore. And it wasn't easy. They experienced poverty, racism, other hardships, but they kept going. They kept preaching the gospel. The sisters cared for orphans, widows. They held night classes for women. They provided vocational and career training, and they cared for the sick and dying. So Mother Lange was very much a pioneer, and it was her deep faith that enabled her to keep going. She encompassed many Catholic social teachings, and I admire the respect she had for human dignity in the life of every person, the gift of seeing God in everyone, especially the women and children she cared for. She also embodied the principle of participation. She wasn't passive. She saw a need that Black children were not being educated, and she did something about it. And because of her, the lives of many women and children were changed, and she inspired others to do the same. So thank you for listening. We just heard about 6 incredible Black men and women of God, and we'd like to invite you now to think about these holy people and their lives, to reflect on how strong their faith was, how they pushed forward with their passion for helping others despite being forced with racism and inequality. And was there a particular person you were drawn to or something that touched your heart? And tonight, let's also ask ourselves, how can we be more like them? So we'd be interested to hear your thoughts and questions in the chat.
Well, the first comment that we've gotten is that this is awesome.
That's
So
great.
it's good. And while we're waiting for people to submit their chats, I've got a couple of questions for our panelists. But Dallas wants to go first, and I'm going to let her go.
Well, listen, I am particularly drawn to, so just to answer the particular question here, I am really drawn to Theo Bowman, partly because she was here in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. She used to come to Congress, served in the area. And so there are many people around us in this city, in this diocese, who remember her. One of the last times I saw her was at the Religious Education Congress. And, you know, it was close to the time of her death. But it was amazing. She was, I think it was a wheelchair at the front. And, you know, there's a couple thousand people in the room listening to her. And I just remember what Tola mentioned was her effervescent spirit, really high on Jesus, and asking everyone to love God and to love all God's people. You know, she particularly spoke to the need to watch out for those populations and folks that are fragile and need particular help. But, you know, she magnified Jesus and she glorified God, and just had a way of connecting to people. So I think of her in particular tonight, because you know what? She walked among us. I mean, there are those of us who remember her, saw her. And I guess that's to me kind of exciting in the sense of sainthood, that actually someone you saw in an auditorium might be a saint one day. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Perhaps a Saint Dallas on our hands.
Dallas, that's so interesting. So many people, because she only died in 1990, Sister Theo Bowman, that so many people alive now were able to see her, hear her, know her worldwide. So that's going to be fun when she is actually named a saint.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
So we've got our first question, and it actually mirrors one of the questions that you have on the PowerPoint. But the question is what is we as St. Monica, we as the American Catholic Church, what do we need to do? What can we do to make our Black Catholic brothers and sisters feel more welcome in our communities? And so would love to be able to hear some of your responses to that.
I'll start. You know, as a Black Catholic, it's tricky. I will be honest about that. The Catholic Church has a long-standing history with slavery. Many convents, many nuns were actively involved in slave trade. Many monasteries and churches were built with slave labor. Some of the universities that still exist today were purchased with slaves, you know, a mix of money and slaves. And there's a lot of reckoning, I think, that maybe hasn't occurred yet or hasn't been, you know, spoken about. So it is tricky being a Black Catholic. And, you know, I think some of the ways that we look for inclusion and to feel warm and welcome, you know, is through the liturgy. So through the music, through the worship, there are Black hymnals, there are Black songs, there are Black musicians, Black music that is very, and Black Catholic hymns that are not played in most churches, that are, you know, overlooked in some ways. There are ways that we can offer up with intentions. I think the prayers of the faithful and prayer intentions, we can maybe highlight more the contributions of Black Catholic saints. You know, panels like this, I think, are amazing. And, you know, also, I think just listening to other Black Catholics, listening to what we are saying makes us uncomfortable in our specific parish communities. I think that is a great start.
Thank you, Tola. I think those all sound like really great starts too. So thank you. Any comments from the rest of our panelists?
I mean, listening. I think we need to ask, you know, why don't we have many Black parishioners? Really trying to understand some of the root causes. And I know several Black parishioners who have left, who have felt slighted or worse, experienced overt racism and haven't felt welcomed or included. So by engaging in this, you know, centering their experience and their voices first and foremost, I think we can learn what they've experienced and recognize the truth that has happened and build from there. I think I'd also hope to see more efforts around better understanding Black Catholic history. I think some of the things we're talking about tonight, where, hey, we have over 900 Black Catholic saints. Our very own patron saint is Black. You know, these are facts that are not really discussed very frequently. And doing more of that, I think is another step towards making our Black brothers and sisters feel more included.
And to that point, Russ, one of the other questions that came in was specifically about St. Monica, and to our panelists. You know, what a lot of the parishioners at St. Monica may not realize that St. Monica was from Africa. And that is a lack of education. And there are many different places where that responsibility, that blame can be put, but we have the opportunity now to change that. And so, what are some ideas or what are some ways? You guys have just been doing all sorts of great research into Black Catholic saints. What are ways that we can take what you've been doing, those same kinds of principles and skills, dig deeper into St. Monica? How do we let St. Monica, the parish, know about this amazing African woman and what her life was like and the traditions?
Did you want to take it, Russ? Sorry.
Yeah, I can share one idea, and I want to credit Renita Lloyd, who had shared this one. She's like, for Black History Month, one thing we could do is partner with like the school, one of our, our schools on our campus, and have them decorate the wall. So when folks come in and drive onto the church parking lot, we can put up images of St. Monica and other Black saints, so that people who are showing up for one reason or another onto the St. Monica's campus can see that, and then start to, ask, what is that, and learn more about that. But I think this is a touchy subject. We're not going to see. I suspect that you flip a switch and overnight, suddenly the statue in the church is Black. But I feel like having dialogue, sharing images of and telling the story of St. Monica, of St. Augustine. I mean, literally, those two images are like front and center in our church, and spreading awareness of that is the start of the conversation.
And I think some things around her feast day can be done, presentations where we show her in her actual light. She's gotten darker over the years, and that's not just a St. Monica's thing, but she's in images of her, even from the Vatican to different cardinals putting up images of her, putting up proper images of an African woman, a woman from North Africa on her feast day, explaining more about her story and her plight and where she was from, and her son, speaking more about him. Because I think it's a relatable story, a mother who was concerned about her child who had turned away from the faith. I think every Catholic mom out there, can relate to these stories. So these are relatable people. And I think that also not just for St. Monica, talking more about the Black Catholic saints. We already have so many that are so relatable stories, and then some that are on their way to sainthood, like Dallas was speaking about Sister Theo Bowman. So, bringing up these people and giving people a reason to want to search and read up more on them, I think is helpful. And I think that we can do those things as a church to try to move people in the direction of educating themselves on Black Catholic history.
I was going to share that sometimes it's just, it's little steps. And I'm going to call out her name. She may not be on, but Anna Rodriguez, I think it was like 2 years ago, we were doing a Stations of the Cross here at St. Monica, and the stations were developed and written by travelers who've been to our sister parish in Nairobi, in Dandora, Kenya. And Anna found a beautiful image of St. Monica that was Black, was noticeably Black. Now, it's kind of funny because when we started, working on the program and such, many people kept saying, why are we using that image for St. Monica? And it must have been at least 20 times that I shared with people, St. Monica was Black. She was from the northern part of Africa. And so sometimes it's little steps like that. And I do know, and I feel it was this past year for the feast day, I believe Dale Severding and Liturgy, they actually did a little step where they invited people in the community and to turn in images of St. Monica. And it was amazing how many were out there. And of course, many of them represented her as a darker woman, as a Black woman. So sometimes it's little steps that then, and I also think art, going on to what Russ shared, and both Russ and Tola, sometimes it's art, how, and culture. Those are the things that sometimes people pick up on the most.
All right, thank you. So we've got a comment, and I just wanted to get more of your response. It's not actually, it's asking a little bit of a question, but really it's more making a comment at first. And so this is from one of our viewers. And our viewer says that I've been going to St. Monica's regularly for the last 4 years. The only time Black is brought up is when the topic of our sister parish in Nairobi arises. And so the viewer says, I'd like to see a shift from the narrative of the charity case that we, St. Monica's, the benevolent, wealthy parish, is helping, poor people in Africa. And that there is a lot more to being Black. And it's not just about funding a hospital or community. The monetary support can be really helpful and can be really great because it can help people's lives. But unless we as a community are really committed to true change on the racial front, it's not what we need to be doing. And so, and the viewer says it always has sort of struck that person as a little bit or a lot of being self-congratulatory. And that one person who came to Mass one day when we were doing the video of Africa had said, you know what, I'm not going to stay because this isn't happening here. And so there's something about what happens here and what happens far away and the challenge with seeing what's happening here. So I just, wanted to know if you had any kinds of responses to the idea of that we need to shift. It's what we were talking about before. It's about images. We need that when we are bringing images of Black Catholics into our parish, we need to show everybody, and not just our brothers and sisters in Africa who are fantastic and wonderful and incredible people. But we need to show a much more equal society. So any thoughts or reactions?
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind is we are celebrating Black Catholics history right now, right? Like this is a moment where we are celebrating the accomplishment of amazing Black individuals in our Catholic community that have done amazing work. So I think this is a start. That being said, I think we are continually learning more and more about racism in America. And I do want to differentiate that someone had asked me, actually, is HCAMP the same thing as Black Committee, the Black Lives Committee that you have here at St. Monica's? And it is a different ministry. We are supporting changing the lives of Blacks in America. We are supporting fighting for racial justice. So I do want to make that comment that these are two ministries. Both are doing very good work, but they are fighting for different causes. HCAMP does wonderful work in Africa, but we are fighting for Black lives here in America in terms of some of the racism that they've experienced both in our community here locally, in our community of St. Monica's, in our nation. So I think the first step is learning more about, one, all the amazing work they've done in our Catholic Church, but also two, learning more about racism and taking that step of understanding and being open to it. So it kind of goes on kind of what Russ and Tola were talking about earlier, is how can we really incorporate and truly live out what St. Monica would want, is to learn more about what adversity she might have faced. So that's kind of a long-winded answer of what I think we can start doing in terms of, one, celebrating Black Catholics and their accomplishments, but also two, the difference between HCAMP and what we're doing in our ministry.
And I think to piggyback on Brianna, what she said was wonderful. To piggyback on what she was saying, a lot of people don't realize their own unconscious or subconscious bias. A lot of people associate, oh, you're talking about racism with poverty, racism with lack of education. Those things do go hand in hand. But what we're trying to talk about and combat is get into people's hearts, because we want to change their hearts. Racism is racism is racism. You can be racist and it affect people's financial status. You can be racist and it can affect people's education. But I am neither impoverished or uneducated, and I still experience racism. So what I've tried to explain to people is try to understand the roots of racism. It's not just, oh, against poor Blacks or against people in the education system and setting. And a lot of our allies, white or brown people who are allied with us as Black people, get that confused a lot. It doesn't matter all the money that Oprah Winfrey has, and she still experienced racism because they thought because she was in sweats that she didn't have enough money to buy a purse. So racism is still in your heart. It's still a deep-rooted sin. And so we do have issues with systemic racism affecting education and affecting the poverty level and financial well-being of African Americans in this country. But even after you've achieved in this country, you can still be a victim of racism. So I really like the point that he made. It's very true. There aren't a lot of Blacks at St. Monica, and specific to what he's saying, oftentimes you don't really hear a lot of Blacks. This year, there was a wonderful panel, Sister Mary Eva, and many things around MLK Day. But you know, when there's tragic shootings, the Dylan Roof situation there, where he shot up all these African Americans who were praying, you know, that didn't get a mention. But at our church, when, you know, synagogues and other things are bombed overseas, those get mentioned. Let's, you know, a moment of silence for our brothers and sisters in Jerusalem. You know, so we're just looking for inclusion. We're just looking for people to understand that anytime you hear poverty, it's not necessarily synonymous with Black.
And Christine, if I may, I mean, Tobey's comment was really, really powerful. I feel like at St. Monica's, as a community, we can be proud of the work being done in Nairobi for sure. And at the same time, like, hold up a mirror and look inward and recognize there are things that we still need to work on as a community. And I think it starts with, you know, can we have more on-ramps throughout the year for learning about the intersection of faith and social justice? And certainly the folks that are part of the Just Faith group are doing more of that. I know our small squad here is attempting to do that, and we need more of it. More ways to listen and learn, and I think that is an important part about kind of breaking the narrative of the charity case. The other thing is, and I believe Monsignor is listening right now, but we need to continue to implore our priests, including Monsignor, to use their voices, to use his voice to spotlight the work we need to do as a community on race. Without his vocal leadership, forums like this, or Just Faith, we're kind of like the coalition of the willing, right? But it needs to go beyond. We need to break through that to confront racism more broadly as a community. And that could ruffle some feathers. You know, I think Father Dave Ayat gave a sermon and caught a lot of flack for it, that touched on racism. And especially in a majority white congregation, you know, I think that things like that can happen. But we also know that silence or neutrality, that's just simply going to maintain the status quo. And that vocal leadership is so important to give sort of the mandate and, for lack of a better term, like the political cover to push forward with more of these conversations and events to learn and grow.
To piggyback, to say silence is violence is kind of what we've been saying in this movement. You know, you have to be actively anti-racist. It's an action verb. So, you know, hopefully we're looking for people to help us along that path. Your silence equals more complicity and more pain. And it's just, it's time to get out of our comfort zone.
Absolutely. Thank you. Sarah, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I wanted to mention when Black Catholics tell you how they feel, listen to them, believe them. I think that's really important. We need to hold each other accountable for that. And as far as our parish, you know, getting involved, asking to hear more about individuals like the ones we heard tonight. And like Russ said, I think it's really important to hear priests at the pulpit discuss racism. That is so powerful. And we have to encourage St. Monica's to do that, and also parishes across our country to do that, and have discussions on issues like police brutality and mass incarceration, trying to highlight these experiences faced by Black Catholics and finding a way to move forward together.
One of the questions that came in is, actually, I'm gonna do that question. I'm gonna do another question first, because Tola, you said something that I think is extremely important, that racism is a matter of the heart. it is not simply a matter of making a decision with our mind. It is a matter of making it's being present to that love and being fully open to that. And one of the things I'm wondering about, as you read about and you did the work that you did on these Black Catholic saints, what was it that kept their hearts open? Were there specific experiences that they had had? Were there specific practices that they do? I mean, we can say they were Catholic, they believed in Jesus, but I'm just curious because I was a history major in college, and part of the reason I did that is I wanted to know what made people tick and what made people do what they did. And so I'm just wondering if, what thoughts you have about what kept their hearts open, because they could have just said, this is horrible, I'm just going to live my life and not fight for what's right.
Yeah, I think there's a resiliency in being Black that I can speak to. There's a lot that you're constantly fighting for things, and you can hear no and one door close, and you can keep kind of pushing on, and that's with anyone. But I think especially these Black Catholics, they were in a time where racial equality wasn't always existing. And some of the saints that we're speaking of, and they're not saints yet, but some of the Black Catholics up for sainthood were born slaves. So some of them had to buy their freedom. Some of them had to buy their spouse's freedom. So I think what kept a lot of people going is just that willing themselves to do better, to be better, and that faith. A lot of slaves sang songs, Christian songs, because it helped them get through. They thought that there was always some light at the end of the tunnel. There's a lot of hymns that are dedicated to just hope and keeping hope alive. MLK has speeches to that effect. And you always want to do better. And especially as a Black person, I can speak as a Black woman, as a Black mother, I want to do better so that I leave the world better for my children, for my cousins, for my younger cousins, for my younger cousins' children. So I don't want to have this Catholic conversation in 20 years on the same topic where my daughter's leading it. I want to try to be resilient, keep fighting, keep pushing, keep being vocal about what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing, what I'm going through, and how people can help. And I'm hopeful that a difference will be made so that at least we don't have to keep recycling these things every 10, 15, 20 years.
And what you just said in terms of the hope, that's, I think, one of the gifts that we have as Catholics is that we have that hope, and that we got to hold on to it, because even when there are things that are unimaginable that we can't imagine in our mind being different, we have to trust that God has the capability to make it different. And so even if we can't see the answer, we got to keep going forward and let God do it.
And I think Catholicism is the best place to do it because we're pro-life. I know some people are and Brianna can speak more to this. I know a lot of people are just pro-abortion, but we're actually pro-life, which means from inception to a natural death. And right now, African Americans they're not dying a natural death. There is a lot of injustice around that. So I'm hoping that the Catholic Church is the best place to start as the universal church that believes that your life matters and that believes that God made us this way in his image and likeness. I didn't choose to be Black, but I'm very thrilled to be Black. But God made me in his image. He made me in his likeness. And I'm hoping and hopeful that my Black brothers and sisters and my Catholic brothers and sisters can understand that and help us to carry the torch to end racism and dismantle it. Brianna, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I do want to piggyback off that. I think an important quote from Pope Francis is that we can't say that we're fighting for the life of other people, but at the same time turn a blind eye to racism, right? Being pro-life, like you said, is helping those from the time of conception to their natural death. Will I be fighting for the marginalized, fighting for the poor, fighting for those that are facing racism? I think being pro-life means more than just being against abortion. That being said, I think I can't relate in terms of what Tola's experienced being a Black woman, but what I can do as her friend, as an ally, is fight so that her daughter doesn't have to go through the same experience that she goes through every day. So that's why I think that a lot of us are on this panel right now, is because we want a better future for her daughter. We want a better future for all Black boys and Black girls, so they don't have to be scared of being pulled over by the cop and that their life is at jeopardy. So I think that's why a lot of us are here today. I think that we're all constantly learning. I know I'm constantly learning. I think that's what we can do as Catholics, is just being open to realizing what our own unconscious biases are, but also being willing to listen to the stories of other people and what they're facing, and also being open to change.
Dallas, looks like you have something you want to say. You're on mute.
Yes, to answer back, no, I don't need to add any more because they just shared beautifully. Thank you.
They did. And I just have to say, I know we're not quite done yet, but we're talking about our Black Catholic saints. And with this panel of people here tonight, I think I am looking at people who we may be talking about 40, 50, 60 years from now.
Yes.
Seriously, this is how it starts. This is how it starts, people, by speaking the truth and speaking what's in your heart and doing what God is calling you to do. So we've got about 10 minutes left. And I'm going to take a look at some other questions that we've got. But, one of the things too that I, as I listened to you present about all of the Black Catholic saints that we're listening to tonight, is that they were incredible visionaries. And they looked at a situation and they said, this is what I want it to be. And so as you think about your own lives, if I were to wave a magic wand over you and said, you are now visionaries. As you go and you look and you dream into the future, Pope Francis is allowing us to dream into the future. What's your dream for the Catholic Church, particularly for the Catholic Church and Black Catholics? I'm curious.
Okay, I'll start with that one. Only because, here at St. Monica's, I do feel we're a welcoming community. But I would say a greater dream would be, and I've heard actually our pastor use this language, which is, can we be radically welcoming? Meaning sometimes inviting and making a place for others that are very different than who's in the pews now. So that's a dream of mine, and how we can all help make a place at the table for everybody who wants to be there.
My dream is for a more loving, a more just, a more equitable world. And to get to that point, we all need to look inward and then figure out what we can do to affect change in our own communities, or use whatever influence we have through our networks to affect change. My reason for wanting to get involved in these efforts was pretty simple. I think about the Gospels, like Jesus implores us to love your neighbor as yourself. I view efforts for racial justice through that lens. Keeping the second greatest commandment, always trying to think about what would Jesus do. That to me is a true test of discipleship. And I think that's the means by which we get to that more loving, more just world. So that's the goal for me.
My dream is to not have this committee exist. There is still so much to be done to address and overcome racism in our country. And sadly, we have fallen short, and too many people have stayed silent for too long. And we've been slow to respond to the sin of racism. So I think we all need to, look and work together. I think wherever there's love and passion, you can't go wrong. And these people we learned about tonight, they were one person, and look at how they really changed the lives of so many people. And we're still talking about them today. So we can all do it. I mean, we have the passion for this, and we can keep pushing and moving forward together.
I think, sorry, please go ahead, Tola. I'm sorry, Tola, go ahead.
I'm going to go after you. Okay. All right, you turned your, all right, so I'll go quickly. Sorry about that, Brianna. I have to say that I agree with Sarah. I really, my hope would be that we wouldn't have to do these kinds of nights, that the Catholic history would include Black history, that Black History Month would be, Black history would be included in American history. My biggest hope would be that I wouldn't have to try to help people understand that Black lives matter, that I would have to explain that it's not a zero-sum game. It's not like a pie or a pizza. I explain it. More for me doesn't mean less for you. So I would hope that I wouldn't have to explain that no one's saying Black lives matter more, that people are just saying that they matter too, as an also. And I would hope that if you're Italian or you're German and I said German lives matter, that, you know, no one would come to you and say, oh, but what about Ethiopian lives? You know, everybody's life does matter, but certain lives right now are on fire. Certain lives right now need your support, need your love, need your care to dismantle systemic racism. That is everywhere. It's in our church, it's in our banking system, it's everywhere. It's in our educational system. And I know a lot of you are tired of hearing about it. Many of you are thinking, oh, this topic is dividing our country. This topic is so political. This topic is everywhere. I wish it would just go away. To that, I'd say this is not a political topic. Human rights are a basic right. And if you believe in the Bible and Jesus, you believe that you're Catholic, you believe that my right to live, breathe, eat, be at peace is the same as your right. And I'd also say to that as disappointed and tired of hearing about it as you are, I'm exhausted experiencing it. I'm exhausted being called the N-word, being called other racial names, being spit on or kicked, physically confronted because of my race. I'm exhausted. I don't want to have to keep justifying my existence. And I don't want to keep doing that because I don't want my children to finally understand what I'm saying when I'm trying to defend them and myself when I'm out in public. It's disgusting and it's depressing. And, you know, I'm just looking for allyship. So I'm hoping that the Catholic Church takes a lead on understanding what the universal church is, which universal means everybody. And St. Monica's is doing its part by having this group formed under Dallas's leadership. And we have other events. So check us out at the events. If you have questions, we welcome your questions. If you don't even agree, we welcome that. Come educate yourself, come educate us, come talk to us. But the nasty racist comments that I receive on social media when I post things about Black lives from Catholics, it's disturbing. And so I would hope that I can open up my email and not have racist Catholics in there. That's my hope.
Thank you, Tola. That last part that you said, it that really makes my heart hurt. And so I am sorry that you have to deal with that, because that's not, nobody should have to deal with that.
Right. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
And all of us, I think several of us on this panel have had to deal with that too. So, you know.
Yeah, no, this work takes courage. It really does. And that's one of the things I think that the Black Catholic saints that we looked at tonight, that's why I asked that question about resilience and hope and what keeps them going. But before we end, Brianna, I know that we wanted to hear from you too.
Thank you, Christine. I think my colleagues really summed up kind of what we want in terms of why we're fighting for this cause, right? We all want a better world. We all want everyone to be treated with respect, regardless of the color of the skin. We want them to be loved because of their color of the skin, right? I want to make sure that we understand that we want to love each other for our differences, and make sure we acknowledge that, right? Like, I'm not going to say, oh, I don't see her color of her skin. I do see the color of her skin, and I love her because of that. So I want to make sure that we make that clear as well. A second thing is, I think we need to focus on, instead of also the future, how we can take change today. We're living in a time of turmoil, whether it be the pandemic, whether it be financial turmoil, whether it be racism, right? Like, this is the time for change, and this is the time when we can really create change. So like we talked about earlier, I invite you to talk to us, ask questions, start learning more about this cause, start learning why it's on everyone's mind right now. And so that's the first step for how we can see a better world for all of us.
Thank you, Brianna. Awesome. We had one last question, so we're going to squeeze it in there because it goes exactly to what you were just saying there, Brianna, because we can't be colorblind. We're all who we are, and we're all beautiful. And as Tola said, made in God's image. So God just has, I was reading something recently where it likened people to flowers in a garden. And the most beautiful gardens are the ones where there's just a diversity of everything. So our last question is, or a comment that someone made, is just like, Jesus was a man of color. We need to talk about that. We need to talk about that, whether we talk about that tonight or we going forward. But our God came to the earth as a man of color. And so I think that's right there. Russ?
I think it absolutely matters because our history has largely been whitewashed to the point at the top where, you can't even find images of St. Monica or St. Augustine that show a representation of who they really are. So because of that whitewashing, I mean, it just gets to what is truth, what actually was fact. And if we can do some digging on what is fact, then I think race is a part of it, culture is a part of it, better understanding that, embracing it, to Brianna's point, celebrating it, that all adds to the richness of our Catholic tradition. And I think it absolutely matters. It should be discussed. It should be embraced.
Well, you all have done an amazing job tonight of getting us started on that path of truth and path of facts so that we know it's real. So thank you for letting me be a part of this. I'm going to turn it over to Dallas for any closing comments she has.
Well, again, thank you to all the panel. I've had a great opportunity. Actually, many of us have had a great opportunity working with them. A beautiful presentation. We also want to thank our pastor here at St. Monica, the St. Monica Catholic Community, and particularly Dominic Janiers and Suzette Sornberger from Faith Formation for offering us this opportunity to be able to share this tonight. I do have one more dream, Christine. We've kind of talked about this. And here's the dream. The dream is that one of these people get canonized. And then that gives us a really good reason to go to Rome. And of course, the pandemic's got to be done, but or whatever that means, whatever the new world brings us. But what's exciting is all 6 of these people, this would be the first Black American, right? Black Catholic American saints, because there's definitely, as we heard earlier from Russ, there's over 900 Black saints, but this would be the first canonized Black Catholic from the United States, and that would be exciting. Some of you know that I went to the canonization of Oscar Romero a couple of years ago, and it was amazing. But it was particularly amazing, again, to be coming from the Western Hemisphere, particularly those people in South America, and of course the people of El Salvador, that someone who walked in their path was actually becoming a saint. So that's my last dream, is that happened, and please God, happen sooner than later. Get those vaccinations out. And please, Rome, actually there is a way we should send letters to Rome, because that's actually one of the things they do, is that people write petitions and letters to Rome asking for a certain person to be recognized. So we should write letters for all of these, so we have a particular reason to go to Rome. Again, we thank you everyone for being with us this evening. I believe this is the last, am I right, Christine? There will not be Catholic conversations during Lent, only because there's a lot of wonderful stuff coming up. We just ask you to look at the parish website. There's some special talks coming up. Of course, this weekend, they'll be beginning to pass out, we're calling them Lenten swag bags, but information and materials that you could use during the Lenten season. And we just hope you will join us here at St. Monica's for that as well. Again, thank you, everybody. Again, thank you to the panel. And St. Monica, pray for us.
Amen.